The weekend before I was leaving it, I was supposed to start a new job at a 40% pay increase. And so I told people, oh, I'm doing this job. I've been offered this thing, probably, fluffing my own feathers a bit. And then the weekend before I was supposed to start the role, I was laying on my bed doing a body scan, and I just had almost like a whiplash of like a lightning bolt.
It's that attunement to what do I need right now? What's going to be most helpful for me? I'm bringing all that up because everything Mark was talking about that became downstream of that silence, of that solitude, of that ability to sit there with yourself, to explore what you're feeling internally, I think so vital. For him to be able to sit here and articulate that, can you imagine the number of experiences and days and hours spent in silence to be able to reach that point?
I can see, Matt, why you put us together here. Many, many things I'm just like nodding in agreement.
Hey, you're watching Just Press Record on the Cultish Creative YouTube channel. I'm your host, Matt Ziegler, and on each episode, I invite not one, but two guests to join me for a conversation-style interview. These are smart, funny, usually a little eccentric, frequently a little weird, often very online friends of mine, and even if you don't understand what they have in common at first, just wait, because I've seen some common ground between them that I've been dying to ask them about, and just press record. The show practically named itself, seriously. So subscribe, like, comment below, and stick around at the end of the disclosures, disclaimers, and reminders, and, come find me, cultishcreative.com, at cultishcreative on Twitter, and by name on LinkedIn. Without further ado, throw your seatbelts on. Let's make it a record. Okay, I am pressing record now. You're watching the Cultish Creative YouTube channel. I'm your host, Matt Ziegler, joined today two guests, meeting for the first time, just like this, just right now. We just press record, and my first guest. Now, if he was a movie, he'd be Shaun of the Dead. Less scary romantic, comedy zombies, but extra stoic-y, kind of memento mori, life help zombies is what I'm thinking. And this one's stretching. You're going to forgive me because, well, don't forgive me for this. This is just that. If Shonda Rhimes and Lainey Wilson had a baby, Shonda DeLaney? I don't even know if you're going to know who these people are, but that's okay. The verbal pun was still worth it. If Shonda Rhimes and Lainey Wilson had a baby, and explain why this guest can talk through all the dramatics of a Grey's Anatomy plotline and still maintain a heart like a truck that he's got running in his soul. And he is the coaching to the coaching profession, what Coach Jim Berkman is to the Salisbury Seagulls. That's a deep cut, but holy crap, learning about that guy. Lacrosse enthusiast, family man, philosopher, author, podcast host of What Got You There. He's live right here. Shaun DeLaney, welcome to the show.
No, thanks for having me. I would say if any of this conversation can live up to half that, we're doing a pretty good job, Matt and Mark, so we'll see.
This is what I'm talking about. All right, next guest. If he was a movie, don't ask me how I got stuck on these things this week, but this is constant. He'd have to be, I'm going with The Commitments, part for his Irish accent, but part for his commitment to the craft, his ability to hear the emotion behind the words of a story. That's what made him such a great coach and interviewer, and his commitments to us as listeners. And I have to do a baby one for you too, so I also apologize in advance. If Marky Mark and Paul McCartney had a baby, and please God, if you were ever Marky Mark McCartney as a child, that's brutal, and I apologize in advance for that. But this guest, this beautiful baby, he's walked on the wild side all the way from Dublin to Germany, picking up on good vibrations all the way, and he's not a band on the run so much as a man who knows what it means to live and let die. Finance industry exeter, world traveler, a family man, philosopher, podcast host of What is a Good Life. All I want to say to him today is, what's good, Mark McCartney? Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, man. I was looking forward to that.
That's part of the point here. So both of you first. This is where I want to start things. I'm a big fan of both your shows. You're both people that I look to see if they've talked to other people when I'm getting ready to talk to people. So that's part of the genesis of this conversation. I want to ask about Derek Sivers. You've both talked to Derek Sivers, and I'm less interested in, blowing him up or anything like that. I'm really curious why you wanted him on your shows. Mark, I'm just curious, why Derek Sivers? Where'd that one come from for you?
It actually came from a good mate of mine who followed his newsletter, and he just said he lived a really fascinating life. And then I checked him out, read some of his books, and yeah, I was so impressed by the way that he responds to every single email that comes his way, and then which he did, and then also just the the sheer variety of his life and the chances and the different directions, all of those things, they resonate a lot with my own, some of my own experience, and then probably even some things that I'd aspire to do. I haven't sold a company for 20 odd million and given it all to charity. So, room for improvement.
Not
there,
yet.
I'd say.
Not yet.
Not yet. Yeah. What about yourself, Sean?
I'd echo a lot of what you just said. I think the variety of Derek's life, probably sent chills down my spine the first time I heard him speak. And obviously there's a clarity to both his thinking and his intentionality about how he lives life that I was really drawn to, really compelled by. And then his writing, I think, is phenomenal. A few of his books, I know recently for me, his book, How to Live, I thought there were some wonderful and profound insights in that book. The very short book, I think it's 110 pages. He's got a line in it that I absolutely love. And it's basically, mastery is the best thing to pursue. And basically it goes on to say, like, the rich can't buy it. No one can give it to you. You've got to earn mastery. And I think he's really continually been going after and trying to reach mastery and earn a good life for himself, which I really admire and respect. And then something that he brought up on the interview I did with him, which was probably about a year and a half ago, which is the first time I ever had this response. One of the questions I'll go back to occasionally at the very end. I'm just curious who they would sit down with, who they would do one of these type conversations with, anyone dead or alive. First time I've had someone say this. He goes, anyone in the world, dead or alive, he goes, I'd like to sit down and have dinner with my son. And I was like, holy shit. Whoa. As a father, it kind of stops you for a second. It's like, whoa, the most important conversation I could ever be having in my life might be right there, right in front of me, and I'm missing it. So I thought that was really good. And that kind of just a prelude into who he is, what he thinks, and how he goes about his life. So I think Derek's awesome. I really enjoy what he does.
Well, I loved both of your conversations. Go ahead, Mark. Go ahead.
Yeah, just one other compliment that I extend to him as well is I could hear somebody else say the words that he says and find them a bit annoying almost because there's a lot of stuff that people would just say for the sake of it, if you know what I mean, or think that's the right thing to say. But I very much got a very distinct sense that he just lives what he's talking about. And so, a lot of people could say similar things, but you sense a dissonance or, an incoherence in what they're saying and the life they're living. I didn't pick up on that at all from him.
Yeah. You're hitting us a deep, profound insight, Mark, which I absolutely love. And I think in our worlds, both coaching and podcasting, you actually can see this a lot. You hear a podcaster try to articulate something that they read in a book. You can tell they never gripped it. They've never lived it. They don't have that felt experience. And you are hitting on something so deep, which when Derek speaks, there's so much intentionality because he's been through it, he's reflected on it, and he's integrated it into his life moving forward. So that is just such a deep insight you have into Derek's work. And I think one of the reasons it resonates with you and I'd say also with me as well.
What's the connection between like the feeling and the clarity to you, Mark? Because there's that alignment between the internal feeling and the clarity of the message as it comes out of your mouth. I feel like that's something you probably thought about a lot.
Yeah, I've distilled this into something quite simple. I think the truth has a vibration or a ring to it. And, that may even sound a bit more feely than it even is, if you know what I mean. But I think even if you think of, even if you hear someone giving a pitch for their company, or you hear a company, like I used to help companies raise capital and even in helping it in investor relations capacity sometimes. And sometimes you can really just sense when there's a news release you're receiving it's just corporate drivel really, like. And so I think it's the same with human beings. Like, and I think it's why a lot of our conversations really don't hit many heights, because we're all kind of passing off this, is this okay to say? It's not really what I'm thinking, but is this the right thing to say? And I don't know about you guys, but when I hear somebody say something, I'm not saying that I'm a truth detector or I could be a lie detector, but just in a not a very conscious way of trying to pick up on what someone said or interrogate someone. I think at least, even if it's not absolutely true, I know that it maybe aligns with them or it's coherent with them, whether it's objectively true or not. But that's generally what I pick up on. And just, what Sean, you said there, I think it's what makes some of this space so annoying. In terms of coaching, in terms of self-development, this kind of stuff, is that so much stuff is just being regurgitated, and almost to the point that actually quite useful stuff is watered down then, because we're receiving it by so many sources from which it doesn't really align with, and it ends up becoming a cliche that isn't really picked up on.
You nailed it. Truth vibrates at its own frequency, right? And that's something I feel like there just needs to be, you need to go through the muck so many times to all of a sudden get to that place where it's, I understand what that needs. There's a softness, a lightness, and almost leaning into when you hear that. There's a real subtlety to that, but I'm aligned with you. I feel like when someone is speaking from like that deep place of what they've been through, what they feel, there's an effortlessness to it, not only how they communicate it, because it can actually come out fumbling, but you can actually feel something true there. I think that's amazing. It's a deep insight you have.
Sean, stick with that. Pull that thread a little bit further. How does a person get to that level of clarity of insight to be able to communicate it, to have it ring true? Is that an experience born thing, or how does a person get there to be able to do that?
I mean, I'll just speak to my own experience, which I think a lot of times through pain. And I think, to Mark, to your point, this is one of those things, right? Like, you got to go through painful experiences. But when I truly look back, it's just like the deepest insights I have about myself, there had to have been some type of a process of going through where it feels tough going through it. But on the other side, it seems like there's a newness to something. I can see it in a different way. And for me, that's been the only process I've been able to go through, to allow, as I see truths in my own life, because until you go through it, you don't know what that pain could feel like. You don't know what you're trying to go towards all the way until you go through that. So I think there's probably people who find that by, I don't want to use words like illumination, but you have this really positive experience where it seems to shine things for you a different way. But for me, unfortunately, a lot of time it is through the hardships. And I think going through cycles of that is helpful. There's almost a pattern recognition you have of, I'm in another one of these painful moments, but there is some good stuff here. Even if right now I can't see it, if I can continue on, I can get to this other place. So for me, it's wrestling through the mud on that, where we could be our own worst enemy at times.
What do you think, Mark? Pain? You need the pain?
Yeah, pain and suffering, bring it on. Like, unfortunately, or fortunately, I don't know, because I think it can give a nice, it puts a different spin on life when you can go through enough experiences where you're like, this has brought me to a place that I could never have imagined. And not in some trite way of trying to silver line a cloud, like you're a difficult time or hardship. It feels like that in the moment, and it needs to feel like that. It's not to extricate myself from that process. But at the same time, just like Sean said, you can, when you zoom out a little bit and go, well, I've been through this before, or, if I didn't experience this, well, then maybe I wouldn't have gone on that trip, or I wouldn't have met that person, or I never would have come to that realization, and I'd still be thinking in the same way that I was that brought me suffering. So I think it's a refinement process as well, in terms of being able to call bullshit on yourself, and question what is true within me, repeatedly, and to shift my perspective when enough new evidence, and evidence can just be feelings as well, right? Like, how do I feel in this situation? When I go through that process often enough, I think it's kind of just, it becomes a sound that you're accustomed to. And, even with that, I think there's an element of this where it's like, when somebody says something that doesn't cause resistance in either party, like if you can say something that even I don't necessarily hold the same view as you, but I know it's yours, I think there's also an element of that truth thing where it doesn't cause so much resistance. Like, I feel what you've said is truthful to you, so maybe I even find it quite disagreeable to how I view the world, but it doesn't get my back up. Like, I can rest in this conversation if I think we're both being truthful. It's not about meeting necessarily like-minded people or like-minded views, these kind of things.
One of those things that's, I would say, hard to do, but more than that, it's so rarely done. Holding the space for someone, for allow that to happen, their truth to be able to be spoken. And you, like you said, Mark, might disagree with it, but you also allow the space for that and not getting caught up in the emotional element of that. That's when real beautiful conversations start to take place, right? Something can really be birthed there. And I love that. And to get to the point too, around the kind of that process of suffering, once again, we lose ourselves in like these words, which can even be buzzwords. Heidegger said, midnight is not in every man's reach, meaning people are not always ready for that midnight hour of pain. And so you have to understand where you're at currently in your own life. And then as a coach as well, or even in a podcast, you have to understand where that person or that conversation is at and what can transpire next. And so you have to be attuned to where you're at. And I think so often, especially in a coaching space or something, we think about like shining the bright light, the bright spotlight, right? Like push harder. Let's look at this. Let's really illuminate this. And sometimes you need some of that, like, that subtle barb, that subtle light to shine in. And you're just trying to reveal a little bit of the pain. And so I think there's real subtleties here where suffering, the way you approach it can actually be really graceful. And there can be a kindness, but you have to understand where you're at in the cycle. And like we were talking about, there's cycles and patterns. So it's helpful to go through it multiple times, but you have to understand where you're at, what you need in this moment and at this period in time, as opposed to just trying to use a prescriptive method to get yourself to the next step. I don't know if that makes sense to you guys, but that's the way that I've seen has been extremely helpful when you're looking at the nuance of that suffering period.
It makes me think of sometimes somebody could say to me, I'm feeling lots of despair, and I might even laugh. And I don't mean that they know me well enough that they'll kind of laugh as well, because we know we've been through this cycle many times. And there's almost like an absurdity of the experience that, I think sometimes even an idea of thank you for sharing almost creates too much of a mismatch. Like I'm saying thank you for sharing something, like you've said something that is not normal, that isn't fully welcomed here, if you know what I mean, or that's a bit out of the ordinary. And I think sometimes just our natural response, if we're paying attention, whether that's an exasperated sigh, a laugh, whatever it could be, just whatever is emerging naturally, is often a useful response. Like I think we have a lot of these, this is how we should respond to something. And then I often think, like, I've had this thought many times when walking my dog. I think of strange things when walking my dog, but like, what if the biggest problems we have in life is our reactions to our problems? And that to me, just around how we respond, and even this eagerness you're referring to there, Sean, of like, I've got to shine this pretty bright light to show them I know where the problem is and this is where we've got to go. But like the best journeys in life aren't this like direct motorway to everything. Sometimes it can be a meandering road, like, or a coastal line, a coastal walk or something like this. It doesn't just have to be like, bang, I know the answer. There's almost a sense of like, not showing off, but an over eagerness, like, or an intensity that there is a problem and we must do something about it. So I love what you're saying there, Sean.
Yeah, I'll do occasionally, once a month, I'll bring together about a dozen of my clients and we'll throw a topic, like a real tough one that I sense a lot of them are wrestling with at the time. The most recent one is the myth of the arrival. Meaning we think we're going to get to this place where pain's gone, where, we've sold that company for 20 million and everything is behind us. We feel great. And it's a total myth. And it's about living in the question, in the unknown, in the mystery, in the ambiguity. And I think like the real levels of maturity that you need to go through is getting to that place where with the period I'm in right now sucks. And this is really hard. And maybe I can bring some humor to it, but I understand this is part of life. And can I have my wholeness as a human being, someone who can handle this, who can move through it with some joy, with some grace, and understand this is part of the process. And I think the people that we deeply respect, when we look to those elders, like modern sages, stuff like that, they're those people who have embodied all of that. The good, the bad, they continue to move forward and they can swim in those seas. The ancient mystic, Tagore, he's got this great line. He goes, the simple wisdom is pure, like water in a glass. The great wisdom is dark and mysterious, like water in the sea. You can't see it, right? It's clouded. It's mysterious. You're continuing to float through it. And I think that's one of the most brilliant lines ever said, because that's what life is. There is never a pure crystallality to it where we can see through it and we never get blocked again. There are always going to be periods where there is hardship, there is mystery, and we're fumbling our way through it. And I think that's what it takes. You need to be understanding of that, oh, this happens. I'm in this period now. There might be a period where it gets a little bit clearer, but I'll be back in this cycle again. So I love that you're hitting on that, Mark, where we can be able to see through that and go through that time period.
Mark, how do you think about seeing the light yourself? Like you're in the middle of the struggle and you see it versus having a coach or anybody else in your life kind of like point the light out to you? How much does that have to be self-discovery?
That's a good question. And I guess that's what usually people say when they don't have an immediate answer and they try to buy some time. So
Buy some time on that.
no, but the thing that I would say is I'm really big on personal realizations. Like, so if something is pointed out to me, like for example, like I don't think there are many people in the world that, now someone being overweight can have many issues. It can be down to just emotional things as well. So I'm just saying, if someone doesn't have some underlying condition where they can't lose weight, but I don't think anyone who is overweight who wants to lose weight is that because they don't know if they eat certain foods or if they exercise or whatever it may be. Like I don't think life is as complicated sometimes in the solution. But realizing that yourself, and just like Sean was saying earlier, for that to be a full embodiment, that's a bit of a mysterious process to me. Like, yes, keeping up a certain accountability or whatever, and if somebody's either supporting you with that or on top of that. But at the same time, I don't know, there's something to it where I think it's just repeated awareness. Like, can we continue, even if that's in a gentle way, even if that's in a confrontational way, a playful way, whatever it is, I just think we need to repeatedly see what is until something clicks in us and changes. What that is in that exact moment, I can't possibly tell you. Like, because a lot of times I know things about myself, or I even know people that are, even psychologists that are extremely successful and bright in their field, and they'll know the same patterns that are occurring in themselves all the time. So they know what their triggers are. They know what their past experiences have been that may contribute to this. They may even know things from an evolutionary biology point of view. But there's some moment in which something, I think, becomes an embodied realization, and a bar repeated awareness and exploration of that. I don't know what the magic point is, or the tipping point for that is, other than I just know that at sometimes change seems to be inevitable to me as well. And a lot of times I think if we can become more our natural self, like if I can be more myself in each moment, then I think sometimes it's a case of just getting out of our way. So perhaps the extent to which we're already in our way, or we're obstructing our natural self.
How do you think about it, Sean? Seeing the light of yourself versus having it pointed out.
I love what Mark brings up with awareness. Once again, buzzword, but literally so much of what I think we try to do is heighten awareness, to have that internal experience. And unfortunately, I think so many people are looking for that external crutch to be there always. And they're always outsourcing that, and they're always having that crutch, and they're relying on it. Until that crutch is kicked out from underneath their arm, they're not going to become their own greatest self, because they're always going to be reliant on something else, as opposed to what Mark's talking about, and having this felt embodied experience around your deepest truths. And so it's about heightening awareness, spending time within those emotions, within those feelings. And I think one of the really tough things and problems when people are going through a new experience, or they're at one of these challenging moments in life, we want to be able to articulate it right off the bat. And that, to me, is a big no-no in coaching, because it's so mysterious, especially the first time you're going for it. You can't place words on it. And so your spouse, your friends might be like, well, why are you leaving your job, or why you're doing this? And they're expecting this clear articulation. And this could be a multi-month, even year process of going through it. And just, I can't describe what I'm feeling, but I'm getting closer to my truth, and I'm leaning in the direction of that. And I don't need words for that. I'm listening to that. And so what we try to do, and it sounds like Mark does this as well, is really heighten people's awareness to that inner felt experience, so they can begin a dialogue and a conversation with that. And there's a familiarity to it. So then when you reach another level or another cycle of some of this hardship and pain, you've listened and you've talked to that voice before, and it's much easier to navigate it. I know this is kind of nuanced and sounds odd, but Mark, I know that you feel this, because the way you described it, I know you've been there. I know you know what it's like about listening inward and feeling that and being attuned to that. And you don't know how to put words behind it, but you're listening and you're navigating it and you're getting closer to it. And that has to be done by yourself. I always tell clients, we're going to go as far as you want to go, right? Mark and I, we're just going to be a door. We're just going to be a threshold. You are going to have to walk through that. And so if you're always waiting for someone else to pull you through that door, you will never get to that felt experience Mark's talking about. And that road, believe me, it can be lonely, it can be scary, but if you kind of ease up and begin to just subtle attunement to what's going on inside, there's a real curiosity behind that you can start listening. So that's the way I think about it. I love how Mark talks about heightening awareness. You've got to be your own crutch. You've got to be the one who carries you through. I look for support all the time, but at the end of the day, you have to be your own person moving through this, and then really begin the dialogue and the conversation with those experiences you're having internally. It is just like you're sitting down with a person. You want to be attuned to them, what they're saying, what it feels like, so you can begin a real conversation with those feelings.
Oh man, that gave me goosebumps, to be honest. That's really beautifully described. And one thing you mentioned earlier was grace. And I think having some degree of grace, acceptance, grace I'd almost define as like the acceptance of the present moment and whatever that is. And just the capacity to hold whatever is present right now as what is present. And, even just that point, I think it's such an underappreciated but hugely important point. I think we're messing this up and interfering with it so much when we're trying to classify what's going on right now. It's wonderful to express your emotional and inner state, but drawing too many conclusions from that is just, we're making a mental process of something that I think is far more subtle, as Sean is pointing out. And, sometimes that energy, Sean, I don't know about you, but comes from me without words, but just with almost like a very clear action from it. Like Matt mentioned, I left finance, the weekend before I was leaving it, I was supposed to start a new job at a 40% pay increase. And so I told people, I'm doing this job. I've been offered this thing, probably, fluffing my own feathers a bit. And then the weekend before I was supposed to start the role, I was laying on my bed doing a body scan, and I just had almost like a whiplash of like a lightning bolt through my body. And my missus is from Germany, hence I'm living in Berlin now. But at the time we were living in Vancouver, she was still back in Germany over Christmas. I simply picked up the phone after I had that experience and I said, "There's no way I can do this." And she goes, "Cool, where are we off to?" I said, "I don't know. Maria says Peru is good." And then that was it. This idea of classifying where you are in the process, like Sean said, looking back on my decisions, I probably never would have made half of them if I knew how long the process was actually going to take. But there's a trust in doing things that resonate with your own truth, that even irrespective of outcome, when you start to live life more from that perspective, life itself ends up being the reward. Like there's not a place to get to or to go to, because right now I'm making whatever vibration I'm supposed to. I'm moving through this world in whatever way I sense I'm supposed to, if you know what I mean. And that, once again, is not really something you can put words on. Like it's a really strongly felt experience. So yeah, I can see, Matt, why you put us together here. Many things I'm just like nodding in agreement, like, yeah.
Mark, I think you said probably the best line that we said this entire conversation, and that was to hold what is present right in front of you. That right there, right? If you can teach someone a skill, can I sit there and hold what is transpiring in front of me? Just hold what is present right there. That art form is such a deep skill to be able to possess, because the way I think about some of these hardships, it feels like a spiral. I'm literally in this vortex spiral. World is spinning. I'm about to leave this job and take a 40% pay increase, but my world is spinning. And I've got no foundation, no firm ground. But you realize behind that, if you can sit there with the present moment, like you just said, all of a sudden there's a still point. There's a place where that vortex slows down. And in that body scan, it sounds like that's where you got there. And now all of that directional energy, which was literally sucking you down, gets paused. You get behind it. And all of a sudden, energy's got redirected upwards. And all of a sudden, more clarity can come from that. I'm not saying instant clarity, but a new path can be lit up. And it might just be the faintest little crack in front of you. But all of a sudden, it's nope, that's the direction I need to go. And I just think what you said is just so brilliant. When you're going through that spiral, can I sit there and allow what is present in front of me just to unfold? Not try to manipulate it, just sit there. Be able to be in that still point and observe that. And so much truth can transpire out of that.
this accepting of the presence versus rejecting of the presence. And I love that you told that story, Mark, about the lightning bolt and the body scan. What are, as you think about through this, both in your professional work and personal life, ways you know you are rejecting the present? What are signals that you know you're in rejection mode?
I think it's, one of the elements that I think is very important in this is just having periods of stillness. It doesn't have to be meditation or anything like that, but enough stillness in your day where you're going to notice disturbances, where I'm going to notice disturbances in my body. There was some work that I was pitching for recently where I was toying with the idea of submitting something that I thought they might want to hear, that would be, I was going to do the work that I was going to do, but it was going to be more palatable, if you know what I mean. Like I was going to translate some of my strange theories, like working with silence with executive teams, for example, would be one part of that. But I was figuring out how I'd present this work. And the moment I did a draft where it didn't feel fully aligned with how I do things, I just felt like all sorts of strangeness in my body. Like there's, I think so often when we think of our values, we like to have these 5 words on a wall and they all look great. And, we're probably picking these very, wonderful words that describe us in the best possible way. I think when we pay enough attention to our body, our values are actually felt experiences. Like they're thresholds to cross. And when we do that, I am going to feel a world of discomfort. Now, once again, predicated on the idea that there's enough stillness in my life that I can observe these things happening. But I personally don't think that we get away with anything in life. If you're living a reflective life, I'm just going to be left with the decisions that I make and the disharmonies in my bodies from the actions that I take or the decisions that I make. And if you like that thing that we were talking about at the start, even with truth, these discomforts can be felt massively. Like almost like that analogy of, I forget whatever princess was it all, laying on the 20 mattresses with the pea under the bed. It's just, it can feel like such an innocuous breach of your own values. But I don't think we're so wrapped up in the myth of our culture that we justify so many of our decisions probably through the lens of what the culture is deciding is the right thing to do. But when we just extricate ourselves or we have time to ourselves in a day and that no longer acts as the crutch or the support, we have to face the reality of our own decisions. I think at that point we feel the full weight of either things that have aligned or things that make us feel deeply uncomfortable. And I don't think we give that enough kind of consideration, I would say.
I think if I added anything to what Mark said, I would just muck up the beautiful articulation of him describing exactly the way I view it as well. So I think that was pure gold right there. What I will say though, because you were talking about that stillness, I think a lot about stillness, solitude, simplicity, silence, right? If you can get 3 of those, you are doing a great thing each day. And so let's think about that, because Mark said to be able to have those embodied felt experiences, to know more of your truth, you need some of that stillness, you need some of that silence. And unfortunately, so few people really throw that in on a daily occurrence. And so you can think about, can I carve out just a little bit of time, some stillness, some silence, some solitude to be able to sit there with that? It can make a massive difference. And that opens up the conversation. I remember a few years ago, I'd listen to podcasts when I work out, like always trying to cram in more. It was beautiful, right? Let's learn as much possible. And then there was like that inner scratchiness, you just like, what is that? I can't feel it, but stuff seems like it's moving too fast inside. And then it was like, all right, I can't listen to a podcast. I literally cannot remember a word. Let me listen to some music. And I still kind of had like that inner scratchiness. Like there was just too much vortex going on inside. And all of a sudden it was like, nope, I just need silence, because I was not getting that anywhere else in my life. And it was like, my body was telling me like, you need this, you need this silence, you need this stillness. And so obviously, like that's not, I don't always work out in silence. Plenty of times I have music on or a podcast, but it's that attunement to what do I need right now? What's going to be most helpful for me? I'm bringing all that up because everything Mark was talking about that became downstream of that silence, of that solitude, of that ability to sit there with yourself, to explore what you're feeling internally, I think so vital. And being able to schedule that in has been really important and impactful for me.
Go on, Matt.
How many layers? Thank you for correction. How many layers of that? And I'm asking you first, but Sean, this is boomeranging right back to you. Like the whole, I've lived this too, where the exercise routine and you're cramming more in with podcasts and you're like, maybe it should be an audiobook. Maybe it should be music. Maybe it should be classical. Maybe it should be whatever. But I think they've actually really good, there's value in understanding those layers and not one of those is the right answer. That it's this like beautiful range of being in tune with what do I need right now? Some days you got to work out to Bach and other days it's, Rick Ross or something. Like, how do you think about like the layers of awareness inside of that, Mark? Because that's a different type of like contemporaneous attunement.
Yeah, it's, when you were saying that, Sean, I was laughing away to myself because, like, if you have any spare minute in the day, why not have a podcast in your ear or read another book or get another insight? I think for me, it came to a point where it's not like I'm not a voracious reader. I'd read a bit and I'd listen to quite a number of things, but I was noticing that like, it's not like anything that I was reading was really providing me with something new. Maybe it was being said in a different way. Yet I was still repeating many of the same behaviors, or maybe they had shifted a little bit and moved into different areas. But also my internal world wasn't feeling dramatically different. I was able to say read a book by Eckhart Tolle or whoever it may be and intellectually have a great conversation about spirituality. But was I feeling many moments of awe or a sense of divinity or something in my life? And anyone can use whatever word they want from that, but maybe just some sort of connection or belonging in this life, this world, the universe, whatever way you describe that. And so I think it's, I can laugh at myself. Like I can laugh at myself for doing silent retreats and telling everyone they should do meditation retreats. Like that's a frightfully annoying thing to do, right? But I also think it's an inevitable part of the process. And so I think almost learning as much stuff as possible to start to see that the, kind of law of diminishing marginal returns is kicking in, at the start when you have very little awareness in your life and then all of a sudden you invite some of these ideas in. It's almost like going to the gym and some sort of sense of newbie gains. They're not going to be sustainable. I think when that tapers off and you're like, okay, just like Sean was saying, even if it's with a coach or a therapist or whoever it may be, someone can be a crutch or someone can support you some of the way. But then you're going to have to figure out something yourself. And, for me, silence, like Sean has mentioned there, I think it's huge. I think it's so simple. Like simple doesn't mean easy. Like it can be really hard to sit in silence if you're not accustomed to silence, or it can be really hard not to be in perpetual distraction mode if you're not used to that. But I think there's like an internal intelligence within our body, within our minds, whatever it may be, that reacts very well with silence. Like even if a discomfort is there, it will probably rise to the surface. Like the silence will give space for that to become really apparent. And I think going back to what I was saying earlier about if we can just be more ourselves or more in tune with ourselves or more aligned with ourselves, the silence kind of is that foil or that space for us to unravel into. And, much of this, I think it's so important to have space away from what the crowd is saying or what people are prescribing. Because I don't know about you guys, but I don't know a ton of people that seem to love their lives. Like I do have quite a group of people at this point where I know people in different parts of the world, but if you just walk down the street, it's not like everyone is saying this life is wonderful, this life is great. So I think some discernment as to what works for you is really important. And I think that really comes with silence. I think there's almost an inevitability upon the contact with silence.
Matt, I got nothing to add to that.
Well,
I'll just clip that out, play those 3 minutes. That was great.
And we will. What about I'm gonna redirect to the source question because I want you to give us your no pressure. Just give us your 3 minutes of brilliant insight, please, Sean. The that range. And remember, go back to like this idea of different content for different parts of the day, and just the presentness to that rage. Why is that so important to know there's not one true answer in those little moments too?
So let me bounce it back to Mark's great 3 minutes. For him to be able to sit here and articulate that, can you imagine the number of experiences and days and hours spent in silence to be able to reach that point, right? Like I always love these, these Buffett or Mungerism aphorisms, it's like one little sentence. It's like, how many years he had to fumble around to be able to get that? You know how many years Mark had to sit in silence or to be so innerly disturbed to be able to get that? No one was telling him to do that. And if he did, at some point, he had to be his own greatest coach and go into that space continually. And so my only answer is you need to experience that again and again. And there's times it feels like you're batting your head against a wall and you don't know where you're off track or what's going wrong or why the noise inside is so loud. But you keep showing up and you keep trying to dissolve that internal noise, that internal pressure, and you start to get attuned to what's working, what's not working, right? And then all of a sudden you've got this toolkit that allows you to find silence even at a deeper level. And so for me, some certain things are just a gateway for me. Like this morning, long swim. I need to go for a long swim. It's literally black outside. I've got the pool light on. It's me and it's just my thoughts suspended in liquid space. For me, that is a gateway into deeper insights, deeper ideas. And so that's a toolkit. And so there's other things I have. And so a client I'm working with right now, he had this, what I thought was such a profound insight. This was a few weeks ago, and he's talking to me about, he had a big Monday coming up, and he's like, it's Sunday, late afternoon, and I'm just so disturbed. And he's like, I told my wife I just need to go for a run. And I go, that right there. I go, 6 months ago, you weren't saying that. It was, let me pull up the email, let me dive into that, let me go harder. He did not understand the subtle attunement to, wait a second, this inside is chaotic. There's that scratchiness. And guess what? A gateway for me to get out of that, for some silence, is this long run. And so that right there is an amazing portal where all of a sudden he understands a way to get out of that and find his own stillness. And so I'm bringing that up because Mark has had just 1,000 iterations and versions of that over time. I always talk about this, right? Like you want to heighten awareness. So Mark has heightened awareness. Oh, there's scratchiness inside. Let me figure out what's going on there and explore that. So that's heightening that awareness, right? And because of that, he's really deepened his presence, right? He was talking about before, like, let me just sit there with the present moment. Well, he's there. He's fully there right now. And all of a sudden, because of these iterations over time, he's got more tools at his disposal. And a tool might just be, I'm sitting there. And so all of a sudden you do this again and again, and evolution takes place over time. And that's why Mark can sit there in 3 minutes, beautifully articulate what is so hard to get to and so hard to do, but all of us are capable of it. You just need to keep going that path.
Mark.
First of all, I just love the use of the word portal, and how that could be a swim, that could just be sitting by yourself, that could be going for a run, or it could be a conversation like this, like between just speaking with the both of you right now. I have to make very little effort to be present. So I think it's finding those spaces in our lives where, yes, sometimes it's great to be able to do the thing that we don't want to do. Like, let's just say if it was a run on a freezing cold day or something like this, some cliche in its area or something like that. And I think it's also really important. And this is why, even going back to what you were saying, Sean, about trying to cram in all sorts of different ways of developing ourselves, developing awareness, whatever way it may be at the start, where it can almost feel a bit frantic that we're trying so hard. Even just to find those matches or those fits between us. And it could even be different tools for different moments, right? But where it can happen in an effortless manner. Like I must say, that's like conversation, like a really present conversation for me that does wonders for my being. But other times I really need to go exercise. Other times I just need to sit on a park bench, go for a walk with the dog. I don't think we have to define all of these things as now I'm being mindful. I think ideally what you'd like to see is like that starts to permeate your life where, this is another opportunity for that. I don't know about you guys, but I've had the insanity before of like walking my dog impatiently because I wanted to meditate after. And then it dawning on me or I could just be here right now with my dog. You know what I mean? So I think sometimes this kind of commercialization of mindfulness, we end up compartmentalizing it too much in our lives, Whereas so many different moments are an invitation into that.
I love how you use the word permeate. You know, it's almost like an ink blot on a cloth that hits and it floods out. And you talk about hey, I'm here with my dog. Let me be here with my dog. And just that right there, all of a sudden starts to permeate out. I think that's just beautiful.
I'm going to bring my dog on for the next question. I can't without somewhere in the other room right now, but like, I swear my dog knows if I put my AirPods in before a walk. I swear he like recognizes the AirPod case and is just like, oh, I get it. You're going to be halfway with me when I want to turn down the street. I want to turn down because, you know,
you're hitting on something so deep. Nature operates in presence. That's what nature is about, right? And so they are so subtly attuned to presence. And Mark, I love how you were talking about presence a minute ago. I really think all of the work we do, whether it's in coaching, podcasting, interviewing, sitting there, everything great is going to flow downstream of presence. So if we're not present, and that can also be trained and evolved, it can be like that ink blot permeating out. There's very few things that are going to transpire that are going to be aligned with what we're going towards. Meaning we want to have a deep conversation. If one of the three of us aren't present, you know, you can feel it. There's something that's not transpiring, just like your dog, Mac. The dog feels the AirPods. It knows there's some subtlety that you're not going to be present to that moment. I think that is just a beautiful example of, wait a second, maybe let me allow this to be the portal where I put down the AirPods and I'm just there right now. I love the awareness you bring there, Matt.
Well, my dog doesn't always love it when but now that the Phillies are out of the playoffs, I don't have to listen to those sports talk radio. So, you know, life goes on. He understands the natural state, Mark, the natural state of presence, like the dog's presence, the pick your animal of choice. How do you think about that natural state of presence that almost isn't human? Like, but we see it, we bump into it all around us.
Yeah, it's, you know, just going back to what you said, even with the AirPods and the dog, though, like, I don't think there's any cheating this. Like, you know, you can't, even if somebody has their phone out and they just say, oh, keep talking, you're like, I'm like, no, like, I'll just wait till you finish that. It's no problem. But like, we'll carry on when you're done. Or if somebody repeats just what you've said, once again, you can repeat things, but it doesn't mean you were listening or it doesn't mean you were present for something. So I just think that's really important. I think times, Matt, we actually remember kind of what a synthetic experience of life we're living through so much of technology. There's ways of being that technology, it can be wonderful. By the way, I think it's incredible. Like, I feel incredibly connected to both of you in this experience. I think presence can overcome even distances or use of technology while connecting. But like, there's so many things now that, like, we've got so many tools, even for a lot of people that carry it around in their pocket, that is going to be like a complete consistent interrupter to your natural state. Like, we're just not naturally supposed to get dopamine hits like whenever we want it at our fingertips. So I think that it's kind of like if you ever go to a forest or something like this, and you're not even going there to go on a particular walk or reach a particular point, just literally to sit and be there. I think a lot of this becomes very innate once more. Like, we realize just what a natural capacity we have for attention, for curiosity, for presence. So I think it's more just a subtraction of things rather than really an efforting towards something. Like, I've a 14-month-old daughter now at this point, and it's just bonkers to observe what she naturally picks up on, or just how she engages with the world. And for me to think that this isn't something that's innate in human beings, I think it's easy to forget with, you know, there's such poor ways of communicating at this point. Like, there's such bad ways of checking our phones every time it dings, like of looking at a screen behind the person that we're talking to. And so many just little nuanced things that have become acceptable that they're not even subtle anymore, they're just part and parcel of how we communicate. But I think that presence is something that is really natural to us. Either if we make a deliberate intention to extricate ourselves from a lot of these loops, or if we just go sit under a tree. Like, I think there's a natural unwinding with so much of this stuff. Like, we look at so many things through the lens of we have to effort this. But often I think it's letting go in that efforting that some of this just naturally arises.
do you think about that, Sean?
I mean, once again, these achievements on Mark, right? I love his word effortless. The truth, like you said before, it feels effortless. It just flows out. And so I think the subtle attunement to that is really important. And another thing you were talking about, that presence, both for others, and I'll hit on that in a moment, but also like you were talking about going in the forest and just being present for yourself and what that feels like and what that opens up and the naturalness of that. And we've gotten so far away from that. And now the presence with others, I think one of the things that you both, I'm sure, have seen when having conversations like this is just the ability to be there, be present, but more importantly, to actually see the others, not through your blurred lens, but to see them, to hold space for them and actually see them and what's transpiring in their world. When you feel that, when someone does that for you, that is one of the deepest leaning ins you ever feel. It literally is like, holy shit, where has that feeling been my entire life? Because just in the work I do, so few people, if you ask them, when is the last time you truly have felt seen? Truly seen. Not like a subtle acknowledgement, but holy shit, that person freaking ripped back my face and looked into my soul. When have you felt that? And that comes from presence. So I love what Mark's talking about there. And I know these are subtleties and nuanced and small things, but really being there for the other person, seeing deep into them, not putting up this lens. And just what I was saying before too, you also do that for yourself. Sit there in presence and truly see yourself. And that is what I think Mark was talking about, or at least the way that I've experienced it. There's this effortlessness that comes out of that.
Mark, what about it? How do you see that in you got this baby? Did you say 18 months old? Congratulations.
14 months old, yeah.
Okay, 14 months. How do you see presence and actually like effortlessness, or I think you even said efforting, which I kind of love. So I hope you said that on the back. How do you see that in the baby? Like, how does that come across to you when you translate it?
Just very briefly, just say, Sean, I couldn't agree more with that a sense of being seen, and what a gift that is. And to just move into then the observations of a child, Matt, even with that, I notice a profound difference in my daughter if she's just being looked at and she's held in our awareness, held in our presence, versus like, I don't know, it very much simplifies like what our real needs are. Just seeing a child just express what it's presently feeling, seeing the effect of paying attention or looking, or then not paying attention and paying attention, like seeing just how dramatic effect that could have on a child. And then just even there, something that I think occurs when you're deeply paying attention or being present in life is that there can be a curiosity around everything. Like if she started to walk now, so I think in a past life, I could find that walk with her really kind of boring. Like, we took us, I don't know how many, 30 minutes to walk a couple of blocks. But we weren't going anywhere. Like I wasn't looking to go anywhere. I had the time and space with her. Like she could pick up every leaf and look at it, and I'm looking at every leaf. And it really makes me think of even like there can be a view outside our window, but you're never seeing that you're never seeing that view twice. Like, there'll be different times of day with the sun, there'll be wind blowing, there'll be different seasons, there'll be so many different things that are going on in the same scene. I often think that we kind of have a subtlety problem in terms of we wanting more in life, but I think we just need to pay more attention to what is in our life, if you know what I mean. And with the child, I think it becomes so clear to me how easily satisfied we are. Like if people are paying attention to me, just like Sean said, if people are really seeing each other, like if we're holding each other in that kind of level of attention, we don't need much more. Like, and everything become a curiosity, or everything has a capacity to hold us in awe. And I'm not saying I go through every day looking at every leaf, looking at it, seeing this stuff. Like there can be dropping into this, I can be losing myself in it, but I know it's there. And like I find this a huge part of my sense of enjoyment in life.
Mm-hmm. That enjoyment, that joy, that harmony, that ecstasy is really just that attention at its fullest. Both you being fully there with that attention, but what you talk about, like the sun kind of beating down on that flower that only gets light here, and not here, it rises up and starts to bloom, right? I mean, nature's got so many beautiful things like that. The same thing is true. So I have a 6-year-old, a 4-year-old, and then a 1-year-old daughter. And so I've seen the iterations where I come through the door and I'm still where I was 20 minutes ago, you know, in the fast-paced velocity of the world. And all of a sudden you realize, wait a second, they can totally feel that. Let me slow down for a minute and just get there. And let me really shine on them. And just, it is a world of difference, not only for me, my inner state, where all of a sudden, like you were just talking about, that joy, that harmony, you realize comes out of that. You know, not let me think more about the problem at work that I was trying to solve or this conversation. Let me be attuned right here. And so my joy starts to rise, but more importantly, the others, they start to feel that presence, that connection, that being seen fully. And all of a sudden, now you've got this symbiotic co-creation of what is really cool in the world. Like you were talking about on the walk with your daughter, where you're tuned, you're present, you're showing her that shining light on her. And all of a sudden, the leaves become fascinating. And it's not about more. You've simplified things and gotten them down to their essence. It is an incredible thing to do. And as I'm hearing you describe that, you can really feel this is something you've started to do. Just like, I'll bring up that analogy again, the ink blot dropping, it starts to permeate. That right there, the one subtle recognition of, oh, wait a second, I slowed down. I was actually present with my 14-month-old, and all of a sudden, I really enjoyed that, and so did they. Let me allow that experience to transpire more often in others. And guess what? We mess this up. We're not always great. There's times where we're trying to do too much, not thinking about it. But once again, all of a sudden, we realize those other times we've done it. And there's this little bit of a recognition or awareness that allows you to go back into those experiences and then live that again. So I think what you're hitting on is just so important in a world where people don't feel seen. People are so distracted. Simplifying this, allowing yourself to truly see, be attuned, and allow that relationship to develop together.
Amen.
Amen, indeed. I'll take a second, Mark, and talk about the work that you're choosing to share. And this isn't bait to plug your podcast or whatever, but it's like, feel free, because I think the underlying question why I want you to talk about the work you're choosing to share is, I think both of you very deliberately are choosing to share things that help find that harmony. You're putting stuff out in the world and you're basically asking people, can you slow down, to use Sean's explanation of like walking into the room and having the baby look back at you. Like, you're sharing stuff where you're just like, can you connect with this rhythm in a certain way? Can you harmonize with this thing I'm putting out there that I'm giving as much surface area as possible? To you just seeing if a piece of this takes you. How do you think about that in the work you're creating, Mark?
I think that's very perceptive of you to say that. I'm really not trying to distill and there can be all sorts of different ways in which top 5 tips can be used around, and sometimes they're helpful and sometimes they're not. But it is trying to, if it's trying to do anything, it's trying to give off a vibration of a sense of being, I guess. And so it's not, it's not that you'll listen to it and have a very clear takeaway of what I could put into, what I could activate in my life right now. It's more like that conversation sounds a little bit different, or the way they're describing their life sounds a little bit different. And there's something in me, and it's even with corporate work that I do. It's even with silent conversations, these things that I've been experimenting with as well. I see this as a very long project. Like, I'd stepped away from finance a few years ago, and I really am just trying to convey something in a different way. I don't think it's always easy to decipher that that's what I'm trying to do, but I think that also helps me attract people that are open to me doing things in maybe slightly different ways than if it's with coaching clients or with corporate clients as well. But it really is trying to, it's like one of those things, like, you point at some of these things in terms of ways of being, and the moment you try to really nail it down, it kind of slips out of your fingers again, or you've nailed it down too much, and it's more elusive than that. Because a bit like what you were saying, Sean, it's a bit more pervasive, or it permeates more. So I'm trying to play a long game, I guess, of just trying to give people a sense of what I'm talking about, or what the experience is of. Because I think we're a society at the moment that is full of information, but not all that wise. And it's because we're trying to take what someone else has distilled from their own experience. And as you were saying earlier, Sean, through their own continual either graft or patience or awareness. And you're trying to say, oh yeah, that's obviously the right thing to do. But if it isn't an internalized realization, you've just got something clever to say. So I think I'm inviting people to slow down a little bit. Like slowness isn't an absolute like a must out of this either. You could be patient and still live a fast-paced life. But I also think there is a trade-off between the speed at which we're going and what we can see. So just, gently inviting people into like, yes, modern life can feel a bit manic, but if we slow down, there could be a lot of other things that you're already in experience of, but you're moving too quickly to notice.
Sean, what about you I know you've slowed down on the podcast for one thing, but the books, the other work, the stuff that you're choosing to share in the world, how do you think about that with, again, back to this, like the surface area of allowing lots of ways for other people to connect to it? And I love the way Mark put it, like it's not a 5 tips how to do this phase.
I think the word that really connected with me that Mark just said is elusive. It's sand falling through the fingers as you try to grasp it. I love that. I recently finished up a new book. It's not out yet, but for the introduction, I literally say, this book is not giving you any answers. All I want is for more questions to be opened up for you here. And this is dark, it's mysterious, it's elusive. And fall in love with that process, that elusiveness, that sand falling through your fingers, you're trying to grab it with the other hand. I think that process is one that continually goes. And so there's no clear answers. And unfortunately, I'm sure you see this too, Mark, like certain people, they love the 5 tips. And at times I found myself, like, oh yeah, those 5 tips, but it's so much more mysterious than that. And not familiar enough with your work, because I know we were supposed to not look at each other's work before that. But like you said, kind of tossing up little opportunities for something to connect with someone. And they go, that's interesting. Let me lean in there a little bit more. And I've been really fortunate because other people, both extremely close mentors, books, little things like someone Derek Sivers says where I go, oh, wait, that vibrated internally for me. That right there. And so if I can ever give that gift to someone else, you almost feel compelled to do that at a certain level, right? I shared on Twitter, there's this performance. She was 15 at the time. Her name's Emma Koch. She is from the Netherlands. She is an opera singer. She does this performance of the French song Voila, which transported me multiple times to another existence. And I thought that was so beautiful. And I'm sure sharing it, it's not going to connect with 99 out of 100 people. But I know for a fact, I had someone reach out to me. They go, that is one of the most magical things I've ever experienced. And that right there, I know that there now is a new conversation taking place internally in that person, taking them to a deeper, more meaningful place. And you almost feel compelled to put some of those things out there that rung so true for you that you hope it catches for someone. So that's the way I think about it. It's almost there, like any of the books, there's been this deep sense that this needs to get done, right? Like you reach the double negative. I can't not put this down on paper. I can't not share this. And so for me, I really try to listen to that. Like you said, Matt, I've slowed down much more on the podcast because some of these other inner urgencies had become so necessary. I only have so many hours in the day. I'm pulled. There's a gravitational pull towards these things. And when they strike, sometimes you just put them out there.
I love the continuous theme that we hear of this gravity in this conversation. It's big. It's really big. Go ahead.
I think for me, that is, you asked a little while ago about different, we were talking about nature and presence, and you asked Mark about animals and energy. I kind of feel everyone has this own natural, call it energy or state that you probably have felt since you were a kid. Call it what you want. If you want to explore things like the daimon or things like that, sure. And so there's this inner energy that I've always felt underneath the surface of me. It's been there literally since I can remember. And so for me, that visceral gripping is really important. There's a very strong inner sense of I'm drawn to this or I'm repelled by this. And I'm trying to listen to that. So for me, the experience I have is very visceral. I talk about get together a number of clients. One of the ones we did a little while ago was around asking yourself great questions. And I say, it's not what the question is, it's what the question does. And I want to be gripped by it. I need something to feel like I'm lassoed into it and pulled. And so for me, that's a very important experience. And that's just there's plenty of times I don't wish this is true, but that's literally my inner state. That's how it feels a lot of the time. And it's not a negative energy. It's like, ooh, that is so deep and pulling. I really enjoy that process. But for other people, that will not resonate at all. But for me, that's the only way I can describe it, because that's my felt experience internally.
You feel that gravity?
You said something. Yeah, you said something really nice there. I cannot not do it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think so often that's a hugely important, that can almost be a precursor to what you're describing then, when you're so clearly drawn to what you know you want to do. But even just that awareness of like, I cannot not do this. And it doesn't have to come with a whole game plan or know what you're going to do for the next however many years. It's just in that moment, being responsive to those drives, those pulls, those aversions. And I think so much, we've got so much capacity to just live a spontaneous life. Some even moments in your life, I'm sure everyone has these, like, I never ever would have wished or invited that into my life. And yet somehow I made it through it and I feel better because of it, and there's elements then like of, I don't know, we can trust ourselves to handle things in life. Like, I think yes, life can be very fragile, but I don't think we're all that fragile. And so there's kind of putting ourselves in positions where that gets tested or teased out of us so that we can make realizations, I think is so important. And it doesn't have to be, as I say, knowing the whole 10 steps or whatever, how many steps it's going to be. It's just that initial invitation of like, I cannot not do this. That to me has been really, really helpful at different times in my life.
There's this line by the late Irish poet and mystic John O'Donoghue. If he was still alive, there are two lines I would love to hear him talk about. But one of my favorite is, he says, when you are in rhythm with yourself, you're untouchable. And the untouchable, I do not want you to think about the American powerful untouchable. It is when you are attuned to the subtleties inside, those inner pull, those repulsions, then you're untouchable. You can flow like he describes as the river, continually open to the unknown and what's unfolding in front of you. I think that is so beautiful. And that rhythm internally, when you're attuned inside to yourself, that's when you are untouchable in the deepest, richest way.
Just on that, because I think this is a fundamentally hugely important kind of realization in life. So much even of how some coaching and self-development work is sold is kind of based on an outcome that you're going to be taken to. But just what Sean described there, I think this is the real treasure along the way. Like, any time that you can feel that you're in rhythm with yourself, like, it doesn't matter what the outcome is of what you're doing. And I'm not saying that in some very pious way. Like, it is literally the experience of doing the thing while feeling in rhythm. That is the reward. Like, I said to my wife a few months back, like, there's moments that we're experiencing now where it's not going to get any better. Like, my heart feels full right now. And so it's not like that once more of what I'm doing takes off and I'm making more or as much as I used to make in finance or something like that, or I finish a book and it becomes a bestseller, or a few more people start listening to my podcast. No. The moment of that experience is it. And it's not to say it doesn't get any better as in, oh, now life is all downhill. No, my heart can be full many, many times. But I think to me, Sean, that feels like a direct byproduct of just what you've said there that John O'Donoghue mentioned.
I've got way too many notes, guys. This is almost uncomfortable. I think this might be a just press record record. I'm inviting you to fully interrupt me as many times as necessary while I go through these. But I gotta say a couple of pieces of this back through the full hardness that I'm feeling in this conversation. And I think that ties directly back at the beginning. We started literally talking about just the variety of life and the clarity and the variety and the mastery being the thing to pursue. Sean, you're the one who brought that up. And I loved, Mark, because you took it to, yes, mastery is the thing to pursue, but there's a feeling, there's a corny in the truthiness, unless it's in your core, unless it's there. It's going to come across as, candy corn, empty calories, unless you've actually lived this thing. You've lived what you refer to as truth, as having a vibration. And I love this because then it says something has to ring true, but it bangs false. I'm going to pause for a second on that. It rings true. This is the note I made to myself. It rings true, but it bangs false. That lightning bolt in the middle of the night for you, Mark. Sean, I know you felt this too. What do you think about rings true versus bangs false? Either of you can take it. Speak over each other. Yell at me.
I'm trying to think because I'm distracted where you brought up mastery, and I know I brought that up. When I describe mastery there, we're always thinking self-mastery. That is where we're going. And so often we think of mastery of craft, which is great, but I think that self-mastery sits under that and is the foundation that mastery of craft gets built on. So I just want to make the subtle refinement and attunement to that. And when I describe mastery, that's the first step. We always want to go first. Self-mastery first, everything else can sit on top of that.
That's a really cool clarification. Mark, I'm actually kicking this one straight to you. This next note I have to myself, I said, we were talking about, and Sean raised the point about you need pain to grow. And you talked about the patterns and refinement. And this little note I have here is just this, you're stepping on life's Legos. I don't know if at 14 months you're able to step on blocks yet. You're stepping on life's Legos, but the question is like, are you gonna build something with those? Are you gonna play with those? You're just gonna be angry about it because they're on the floor and it's dark? Or are you actually gonna take those patterns to refine yourself, to refine the experience? I guess, Mark, this one's for you. Like that reframing of the experience, the reframing of the pain is almost, maybe not the most important step, but that's a huge perspective shift we undergo.
Yeah, and I'd even say it's not reframing so much as it is holding more in awareness. Like, so if, for example, I'm feeling a bit crappy someday, it's not to say that I'm not feeling crappy. It's just if I can hold that discomfort even in awareness, I'll see that there's fluctuations in that, or there's movements in that. And there could also have been a moment where I laughed that day. So what does that mean? I can't say I felt terrible the whole day. It's holding more in awareness. And it's like what Sean had mentioned earlier as well, this sense of, like, I've been through this before. So yes, this feels difficult right now. Yes, I don't want this to be my day in some ways, but it's here. And so it's an even a non-resistance to what is here, I guess. And through that, then just an understanding that, like, okay, I'm not extricating myself from the experience, but I know enough to know that this has come before. Like, even, it doesn't have to be some extreme dark night of the soul stuff, but just, I've been through this before. So I guess it ends up as being reframed in some way.
Yeah, that makes me think of your grace as in grace is accepting the present moment idea. Go ahead, Sean. What were you going to add?
Yeah. No, I just love what Mark said there around that non-resistance. A lot of what I work with when working with a one-on-one client is, I think, a lot about energy. And if you picture energy in a tube or a water bottle, I see so many people poking holes into their tube and energy gets dissipated everywhere. This is literally one of the biggest things I see. It's not people need more energy. It's they need to stop dissipating the energy they have. And so when I hear Mark talk about non-resistance, I could be having a crappy day. We've all had plenty of them. But by resisting it, I'm pouring any energy I have and outsourcing that out into the pain. Why did that person say that to me? Why did this podcast go that way? And any inner energy gets dissipated out. And if we can start plugging those holes, Mark's words, non-resistance, all of a sudden you realize that you have a lot more capacity to handle everything that's present in front of you. When Mark describes that, I think about a circle, right? And the circle holds it all. It's got my crappy day here, but there's a little joy here, and I can hold all of that space here. But if that's just potential energy here and I'm dissipating it everywhere, then all I'm doing is focusing on that crappiness in the day. So I think about a lot with energy here, the non-dissipation and the non-resistance of that.
I'm sticking on this thing from you, Sean, then, because it connects to that exactly. And this is probably how we got there. The stillness, solitude, simplicity, or silences. And you said you got to get 3 of those. And did I get that right? I want to make sure I have this right. Or were there more S's involved in this beautiful alliteration?
I really think about stillness, silence, and solitude. Simplicity, I think, is more of a macro thing. But if you can do that, and this is not some huge thing, right? There are subtle moments that you can find with that. And just the attunement to that, right? This is not some prescriptive thing. I don't just find a thing that makes you feel more connected with yourself. There you go. There's no S there, but it's a field. And so it's just easier, all right, I don't have earbuds in, so I got some silence, I'm not moving, or my mind's not moving. I got a little bit of stillness there. And guess what? If I have my wife coming in, my kids running in, it's going to be very hard to be deeply there in that space. So it's just an easy way. We love the 5 tips or whatever. There you go. There's 3 of them or whatever. 3 out of 4 is 100% irrelevant, but I think it really has cascading effects on your inner state of being. And then what we were talking about before, that inner state of being permeates out to everyone else, right? If I walk in the door and this inner state is in a bad spot, instantly my wife feels it. And you can cut that tension with a knife. Everyone knows exactly what I'm talking about. And so you got to think about, what do I need to do so that inner state of being can be as soft, as calm, as gracious as possible. That right there. And use whatever words you want, but you know what I'm talking about, where you enter a room and your presence doesn't cloud up that room with toxic fumes. It's a clear presence. Whatever you need to do to get to that space is what I'm saying. That right there is crucial. There was something that really stuck with me, the Dalai Lama. So amazing spiritual master, whenever you think of him or whether you don't think about him, here is someone who spent a lot of their life going into spaces to try to get to places we want to go, right? I think we could probably agree on that. And he said, I thought this was very insightful. He said the most important part of his day, this was in the last decade he said this, is the 60 minutes he spends in what he calls like his sanctuary. It's the spot in his home. 60 minutes in complete solitude each day. I'm not saying you need 60 minutes, but here is one of the most well-known calm spiritual master. Don't even go there. Just someone who spent a lot of time in these spaces has said, yeah, for me to be able to do my work, I need some silence. I need some solitude. I need some stillness. And I think so many of us, we feel the necessity that to be there for others, especially as parents, right? Like we can't find those times, we can't find those spaces. But what I was talking about, that state of inner being, Dalai Lama is not going to be the person he can be for other people. I'm not going to be the person I need to be for my 3 kids and my wife and my dog. Shout out to the dogs out there. If my inner space is disturbed. And so what do I need to do in even the smallest ways to get myself to that space? I know I just went on there for a while there about, 3 out of 4, stillness, silence, solitude. But that's when we talk about the layers to it. That's how I'm thinking about it.
But it connects beautifully to, and it's one of the points that Mark made about the presence. And here's Mark with his 3 P's to play, or 3 S's, I think. Present permeates the pore. I'm very amused. I am very amused. Let the record show. And I have to ask: Are either of you Watchmen fan? You like Alan Moore, any of that stuff?
I love Alan Moore.
Yeah. So like, I think I wrote it in the columns here like 3 times. Like the character of Rorschach, whose face is the literal ink blot, like that's his mask, and just the idea of Rorschach's role as the investigator. And I feel like, for my 18th reread of Watchmen, like I need to just think about it through this lens of like the act of being present is what permeates the portal. He's the cantankerous investigator through the entire story. He's neither superhero nor supervillain, but he's the ultimate expression of presence. Are you a Watchmen guy at all, Sean? Did I just say something?
I'm not,
crazy?
so I'm grossly
Mark, tell him on why
adding anything to your own.
I will also say, just Matt, there's a documentary on Alan Moore. He's almost like a bit of a mystic at this stage, Sean. The mindscape of Alan Moore, I think, is fascinating views on what reality is. But I really like what you said there. But there's also, even in the description of that character, there's, I think a big part of this as well is just realizing that I'm not all good or I'm not all bad. Like, if those judgments or labels aren't very helpful for all of our our behaviors. Like I'd ideally like to have a good relationship with all aspects of myself. But just the capacity to go, man, I really wasn't nice there. And you know what? I intended not to be very nice there. Like I had a moment of presence and I just still decided to push that button. And there's something in that, I think, where a big part of this is like none of us are perfect. I think so much of the human experience we hide from each other is the very stuff that could connect us with each other. And so much of ourselves that we try to, I don't know, use the word ego as a scapegoat to disavow a part of myself or not accept a part of myself. So just when you mention that there, I think there's a big role in just coming to terms with who and what I am. And most of the times I think I'm a pretty lovely guy. Like, you know, I've definitely got an edge to myself in times as well. But just not to be hiding any of myself from myself. So that's just what I thought of when you mentioned Rorschach there.
Go ahead, Sean. You have a thought. I see it.
Yeah, no, two things pop to mind. So I think so often we see these people at the highest levels of calling spirituality or artistry and craft, whatever it is. So they're, are you guys familiar with Thomas Merton at all?
Yep.
I think so, but say who Thomas Merton is.
Yeah, so great. I think he was a Jesuit priest, you know, spent his whole life as a monk in the sanctuary, everything like that. So he'd been doing this for 40 plus years. And I forget if it was a sickness or an injury or something, took him to the hospital. This is in his private journals. Like, I heard about this and went through it, and this is fascinating. Here's a guy who's been doing the deepest spiritual monk work for 40 years. And he ends up in a hospital and sees a woman that he becomes so infatuated with, he's willing to throw everything away. Reading his private journal, it is a complete spiral. He spent 40 years doing pure perfection here and just unravels. And I'm reading this and I go, holy crap. I go, this guy's been doing this for 40 years. Maybe I can show myself a little grace that, you know, how I showed up this afternoon wasn't the best. And that leads to my second thought. The founder of Aikido, the martial art Aikido, there's this great line. So one of his students was saying, Master, you never mess up. How could that be possible? And this is the deep insight. He goes, I mess up all the time. I just recover so quickly you never see it. And so I think I'm holding Thomas Merton in the space. Yeah, we're going to mess up. But can we catch ourselves and can we refine ourselves and get back on track as quick as possible? I thought to me that it kind of released the weight in my chest of trying to be a level of perfection and just gave myself some grace. And then also realized, let's see how quickly we can recover from those mistakes.
Yeah. And simply be aware of the things we've done and be accountable for them. Like, I think even that goes a long way to I don't know, to a healthy relationship. Like, you will have conflict. We will not always behave in the most impeccable way when conflict or tempers have been raised. Can I be accountable for it? Can I see what I'm doing? Can I ask the other person how it felt when I behaved like that? Can I really try to feel in my bones how this was being received? Like, and I think those things can alter our behaviors going forward.
And I know there's like books on like great investor mistakes or great business mistakes. And here's Bezos commenting on the Fire Phone and like all those disasters. But like that Aikido person's like quote, I think it's a Dalai Lama story. There's a Pema Chodron story about like some great spiritual leader, same thing, basically gives somebody horrible advice. Are you familiar with the story where like it's like this like 60 or 70 or 80-year-old priest, and he's jacked and he's old Kung Fu movie style, like doing all this crazy stuff, but he's old for it. And he asks, you know, the great spiritual leader, like, am I going too hard? Like, is this a bad idea? It seems like it's a bad idea. Is it a bad idea? And this great spiritual leader is like, yeah, it's a bad idea. You're too old for this. You got to knock it off. Like, it's not worth it. Just your body needs to be set aside for your mind, not the other way around. And the guy gets like horribly depressed when he quits all the physical activity. And I believe in the story, again, I'm like half remembering a Pema Chodronism from years ago. I'm pretty sure he takes his own life. So he like commits suicide because he's no longer being physically active. And the question back to the spiritual leader is like, do you feel guilt? Do you feel shame? Like, what do you feel? Because you gave him the advice to stop. And he's like, yeah, at first you try to like dissipate it, to like push it out. But he's like, now it's just lives with me. Like, where is it? It's right here. Like, it's just in my life all the time. I don't hate it. I don't fight it. I don't feel good about it. But I acknowledge all those feelings and I acknowledge its presence in my life. think I've been shook by that story for years now. So hearing that publicly with you guys.
Yeah, I think a lot of what we've been discussing today, actually, there's something else that's coming out of that story for me. And Mark was so beautifully articulating that subtle attunement to like that inner energy, that inner feeling, that felt sense. And we talked about, that pursuit of mastery, self-mastery first, the deep understandings of what actually is good for you and what you need. And so I'm hearing that story. And if that guy had listened maybe a bit more to those inner things Mark was describing, that when he hears this great spiritual master give a bit of advice, he knows this could be great advice, but maybe it's not great advice for him. And to follow your own truth. And like Mark was saying, truth vibrates at its own frequency, and the attunement to that. I was just hearing that come through in that story as well. At least that's what stood out for me, especially in the space of this conversation.
Any reflections on that, Mark? That hit you in any way?
Yeah, there's both, especially even just after hearing Sean's interpretation there, that resonates a lot. And yet so as well, what you were saying, Matt, like the idea that, I don't know, sometimes we think that we have to get over something or get out of something. And sometimes I think things just sit with us for a long, long time. And can you find it in your heart to accept its presence almost? Because it might be very, like, I can think of things like it might be very inconvenient for my present world view of myself almost, to sit with things from my past. And yet they only end up controlling me more the more I try to push them out. When I can allow their presence, I don't know, certain things sit with us. Like if things were to really matter, like I don't invite the death of someone who's very close to me right now, but if something were to really matter, I'd like to be reminded of that sadness or that loss at some point. Otherwise, what did they mean to me in the first place? Like, or why was I holding on to the idea of them so much or loving them so much while they were here? I'd kind of like that idea of grief being this kind of fluctuating energy within me associated with a particular person or event. And can I allow it then to resurface whenever it is? But I do like the idea that with kind of everything we've ever done and ever been and ever said and our being, we don't get to just scratch some of this stuff off. It would be very bloody convenient if we could, but unfortunately it's not the way, or fortunately it's just the way it is,
So somehow I need to crop that to make that the last word with Sean, please, because I'm going to butcher it anyway. So go ahead, buddy.
No, I think so much of what Mark has talked about is the cultivation and evolution of being more of that total being. And what you were talking about, having and holding the space for all of that to sit inside of us. I'll bring up another line I love by John O'Donohue once again. And it's, may you have the wisdom to enter generously into your own unease. The wisdom to enter generously into your own unease. And I know it's not completely applicable, but I think he's describing you need to have that wisdom to gracefully enter into things that make you uncomfortable, because like you said, Mark, we're not getting rid of them. They will be there in that space. And how do we want that relationship with the totality of who we are to be moving forward? I think it's beautiful.
I cannot not do it to have a full heart talking to the two of you. Just the gravity, the relativity, the evolution that I feel just on planet me while all my universe, but maybe it's really, it's our universe, and how it's ever expanding to an abstract heat death. We all know this, but at the same time, that's dark. But this message that life is not fragile when it's in rhythm with itself, that total being that you're talking about, finding the rhythm, noticing the rhythms, getting into the rhythms. Sean DeLaney, Mark McCartney, this is an absolute joy. Thanks for joining me today.
Thanks, guys. It was a lot of fun.
Thanks a million. I really enjoyed that.
Thanks for joining us. Like, comment, and hey, subscribe below to Cultish Creative on YouTube if you haven't already. As the good compliance people want me to remind you, Matt Ziegler, that's me, is a managing director at Sunpoint Investments. The opinions expressed in this podcast do not necessarily reflect the opinions of Sunpoint Investments. No information on this podcast should be construed as investment advice. Securities discussed in the podcast may be holdings of clients of Sunpoint Investments. I hope you've been entertained. I hope you found this useful. I hope you talk to a professional before you try any of this stuff at home. And most of all, I hope you've subscribed. Be nice to each other out there. And don't forget, head over to cultishcreative.com and let's make curiosity a habit together. And I'm out.